Good morning, ECOS line team. Welcome again to our South Carolina Live Line Training Center. And today is a beautiful day here in South Carolina. February, we got Mr. David McPeak. He's Director, Professional Development. I've never heard anybody with that title, but it's a title that fits him rightly. This will be his second time here. He was here just a little less than a year ago, and I'm going to spend a little time introducing more of who he is, and as far as his author, he speaks all around the country. He's got a book, Frontline Leadership, The Hurdle, and I want to share this with you all. Just some tidbits here from the people that have been reading this book and listening to him speak. And there's some key words here that are very interesting, very powerful. And they are interacting, creating a positive safety culture, developing, planning, and maintaining our safety programs, descriptions of tools and techniques to minimize errors and prevent harm, confidence, guidelines, and develop new tools, worldview regarding safety, managing my own attitude. That's a good one. Build teamwork, create a safety culture, engaging, informative, relative tool to add to the toolbox, leadership and safety training demonstrated to me, and I am a true believer. Well structured, facilitating the interaction and ability to adjust and connect, engaging and insightful, working environment. All these words. Now, Mr. David here, I've known him for about 3 years, met him at a IP conference in Dallas about 3 years ago, and we've formed a friendship. Incident Prevention is partnering up with ECOS. We're partnering up with them. If you go to electriccultureofsafety.com, you'll see on the right side at the home page on the top, you'll see a link that goes straight over to Incident Prevention. And the idea is here is that teaming up is we can become a more powerful team to get the word out for safety, that you guys could come home, our heroes of light, they could come home, and we try to ensure that they're with their family crews after the task is completed. And I want to read just a couple things here. Under safety, this is his intro basically. First chapter, incident prevention, part of safety involving actions taken, barriers positioned, and controls designed to eliminate or reduce undesired events that cause harm to people, property, and systems. Basically, in a nutshell, stopping bad things from happening. And then he goes to the safety. So here's the two main, incident prevention and safety, two main categories here. And this is a good one. Individual and organizational responsibility to act, think, plan, and work in a manner that prevents harm and encourages growth, ensuring good things happen. Now I call him the Grand Master of Safety. I told him that the other day, and he kind of laughed, and he said, well, I didn't earn that. I didn't deserve that. And what's really funny is in our production team here, Mr. Joey Pelletier, who runs our production, he trains Kung Fu, and he does some fights and things like that. And he says that the Grand Master, they never call themselves the Grand Master. The students call them that. They don't call themselves. So it's very fitting. It's amazing. But here, listen to this. This is super important. This is the most important part that I see in this whole book, and this is the theme of what this book is about. And that is exceptional safety equates to caring about people. It is achieved when organizations and employees work together. And that's what we're doing here. Perfect example. Believing it is a competitive advantage for both. Believing. And right there, this safety has to become a belief. It's not something that's written necessarily in rule books. It's not something necessarily you learn in the training yard at all or in some conference. Safety has to become a belief. And that's what truly this is all about. And Mr. David's what he's about. Y'all enjoy. Thank you, brother. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for what you're doing with ECOS. You said it. I mean, teamwork, we can achieve safety. And I very much appreciate Brent's Grandmaster comment. Decidedly, I am not. But here's what I do believe is we can master safety. When we just thinking about the Grandmaster, I am not that, but we can master safety. And you may think, well, if we're talking about safety, why are we doing a presentation about leadership? And the answer is, in order to get safety right, and our goal has to be, I very much love the intro there, we've traditionally made safety all about preventing harm. And in my mind, that's important, obviously, but it's half the equation. The other half, encouraging growth. And the way we do that is to care about people. We'll talk about that when we talk about C5 leadership. But in order to really excel at safety, not just be compliant, not settle for the things that we normally do, it starts with getting the leadership right. It starts with creating culture, alignment, teamwork, those sort of things. And remember, it's been interesting to me when you think about teamwork, that word team. Throughout the book, I capitalize the word team every time, T-E-A-M. Together, everyone accomplishes more. And it's been really cool for me just to see a lot of times when people are texting or emailing me or whatever, that they're starting to capitalize team. And I think the more that we can just think alike and understand our individual and our team responsibilities, we can start to really accomplish great things and achieve exceptional safety. That's what it's about. And so I want to spend just a little time today talking about the first part of that. There's three parts of it. Incident prevention. That's the Incident Prevention Institute. That's what we do. Going above and beyond that, it starts with leadership. We incorporate human factors into it. Then we can really get safety right. And so today, that's what we want to talk about, a little bit about leadership. And in thinking about that, it's probably good to start with, because leadership's all about creating culture. And ultimately, it's all about how much you care about people. And caring we define again as preventing harm and encouraging growth. But let's talk about the power of culture and influence. You'll probably never see this again in a presentation when we're talking about safety, but it's okay to text and drive. Now, I really want you to think about, have you ever told someone that it's okay to text and drive? And especially when you're in a corporate environment and a safety meeting and we're trying to say and do all the right things, people kind of get mad when you say that. And I like to ask groups, have you ever told anyone to text and drive? People get mad. Number one, while we're talking about this topic, I want you to think about something. Keep this in the back of your mind for later. Do you think it's wrong to text and drive? And I ask people that and they, oh, no, you can't text and drive. Then the obvious next question is, raise your hand if you've done it before. And inevitably, every hand in the room goes up. And I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but if you've done it, you don't actually think it's wrong. And we make safety very situational. And there's a big difference between something we think is compliant and following the rules, don't text and drive, versus what we actually believe, which is it is okay to text and drive when there's no other traffic on the road, when it's a short, small message, when the sender is so important or the message is so important, the culture we create, that I'll do it. And the follow-up questions to that are a couple of things. Have you ever sent someone a text when you knew they were driving? Have you ever responded to a text when somebody knew that you were driving? And maybe the biggest one, and really think about this from a leadership perspective, have you ever been texting and driving when somebody, especially maybe like your impressionable teenage kids, are in the vehicle with you? And so in all of our safety manuals, up on bulletin boards everywhere, we say, don't text and drive, it's wrong. My question is, what message are we actually sending? And what kind of culture do we create? Are we creating a culture that encourages or discourages that? And a very small part, we'll talk a little bit about communication later, of communication, is the words we say. Like most studies say, 7% of communication is the words we use. Much more what we do, our body language, those sort of things. So I want you to think about, as we go through this, what kind of culture are we actually creating? Not the kind of culture we think we're creating, but what message are we actually sending? And that's a very important part of leadership and why we start with this. So in saying that, thinking about leadership as a whole, I think of leadership as three parts. The first part is what leadership is, and that's really, really important, is to understand leadership comes from the combination of your positional authority and your personal influence. You have positional authority based on an org chart somewhere. You have positional authority based on maybe education, certification, those sort of things. You get positional authority from, I've got 30 years experience doing this job I'm really good at. All those things give you positional authority. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with it, but personal influence has to trump authority. And I feel like, especially in the way we lead safety, we make it all about, here's the rule, here's the consequence, do this or else. And we rely way too much on our authority. So thought one for today in thinking about how to lead safety effectively is influence over authority. That doesn't vilify authority. There's nothing wrong with authority, but we can always force compliance as a last result. What we don't want to do is force compliance as our starting point. And far too often we do that. So we'll talk about what leadership is, revolving around those two sources of leadership. And then the next thing, who leaders are, characteristics of effective leaders. And we'll discuss something called C5 leadership, which is really all it is 5 words that start with C that form a fantastic strategy for how to increase your influence. And then we're going to spend a little time talking about what leaders do, some specific leadership skills. Very important to note, all of those things in leadership as a whole are a skill. Anything that's a skill can be learned, practiced, and improved. And what really encourages me in this industry, almost everybody that I talk to and folks that are in leadership positions, they're there for a reason, and they're really good at what they do. And so a lot of times people focus on, here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses. We got to look at your weaknesses and improve on them. And I agree with that to a certain extent. But what I think really works well is, here's your strengths, how can we make them even stronger? And the more we do that, that kind of takes care of the weaknesses, and that's also the teamwork part of it. So that's what we're going to talk about. What leadership is, who leaders are, what leaders do. And you see an image there of a person jumping over a hurdle. And I cannot stress this enough in terms of leadership. I want you to think about right now track and field and a hurdle, the literal hurdle, and then there's kind of the figurative part of what we're saying right now. But in terms of track and field, literally, in terms of a hurdle, if I just walked up to that hurdle and I'm standing still and I try to jump over it, that's almost impossible. What's really important to get over the hurdle, and that's why I titled the book, Frontline Leadership, there's 2 books, Frontline Leadership, Frontline Incident Prevention, the hurdle. Because of this, what's really important is the run-up. And the run-up is 2 things, creating culture, developing relationships. The better you do that, the better we are. So I want you to think about everything you do as a leader, having difficult conversations, providing constructive feedback. Sometimes maybe you're sitting in a group of your peers, maybe in a presentation like this, and you have a question. Do you have the confidence to raise your hand and ask the question, or do you not? Those things are leadership courage kind of things. And they're all hurdles, and they're very difficult to do in the absence of the right kind of culture and the right kind of relationships. That's why we have to talk about this and get it right before we can start with safety. And so that's part of it. And then the other sort of principle that I want you to think about, something that I think with very good intentions we get wrong, we spend most of our time in safety talking about what we don't want. And I equate that to basketball right now. Let's say that, especially since there's basketball on the scene. But you see, it's deflated. There's no air in it. How often do you watch a game and the team is winning and it gets towards the end of the second half or the fourth quarter, depending on what kind of basketball you're playing, whatever, and we change our strategy and we shift from the things that worked and why we're winning, and we completely change our strategy to let's start trying not to lose. In other words, we slow down, we take the air out of the ball, we delay the game. And how often do you see that? Sometimes it works. Actually, probably most of the time it works. But how often do you see that and the team ends up losing the game because they stop doing what they know? And I feel like in safety, we're guilty of that. We spend too much of our time and effort talking about all the lagging indicators, people that have been hurt, things that have gone wrong, and that's valuable discussion. We spend most of our time in job briefings and work planning discussions, identifying hazards and talking about what could go wrong. And we should. But you want to radically change a job briefing, just look at that group tomorrow morning and ask them what could go right. It's 7 o'clock in the morning right now. We get off work at 4. If everything went perfect, what would that look like and how can we make that happen? In other words, start leading to win rather than leading not to lose. And don't make it the goal very practically, just to keep people from getting hurt. Let's figure out how to make them better. How can we excel at that? So that, when you think about the hurdle and that track and field, that's kind of the figurative part of it. The literal part of it is, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that having difficult conversations, dealing with different kinds of personalities and people, different levels of motivations, the moods we're in, how prepared people are for work, show up fit for duty. The human fallibility piece of it, study human performance. Principle 1, people are fallible, even the best make mistakes. We have to take that into account. Our programs can't assume that because we've got perfect programs and processes and we've done perfect training on it, everybody's going to perform perfectly. That's never going to happen, except for specific task executions for specific periods of time. We'll talk about that later. Finite resources, competing resources, some of the us versus them mentalities that exist. A lot of times you see whether it's folks in the field versus management or this department versus the other. I want you to remember something. The next time you start to think of we're competing against our own organization or our own team, or we are blaming somebody else in our organization, be it somebody from fleet or finance because we don't have the resources we need or whatever. We're all part of the same team. Together, everyone accomplishes more. And the next time you find yourself thinking of or involved in any of those us versus them mentalities, I just want you to remember this. Hazards do not discriminate. They do not care. And the easy way of thinking about that, if I took an energized power line right now and unprotected without rubber gloves and insulate, isolate, all that kind of stuff, let's just say that a union line worker and a non-union line worker both touched it, who gets electrocuted first? If I went up on top of the building right now and the CEO and a person we just hired this morning jump off, who hits the ground first? Hazards don't care. And too often we compete against ourselves. When we think about safety, make them the enemy. And so again, I can't stress enough, you cannot spend in a leadership role enough time and effort. The two most important things in my mind you can do: create culture, develop relationships. You do those things well, and the gauge of that, how well you've done that, how comfortable are we communicating with each other? And by communicating, I mean we all say everybody has stop work authority. How often do people use it? We all say we should report near misses and near hits. How often do people actually report them? We all say, I want everybody to be involved in a job briefing, and yet how often is that involvement limited to one person talks for 5 or 10 minutes and then says, does anybody have any questions? Does everybody understand? Nobody says anything, we go to work. And we think everybody's involved. Don't involve people, empower. That's really important. So that's something to think about. How comfortable are people communicating with you and within your team? And so that sets us up for what we want to talk about, what leadership is. The two sources of leadership I mentioned: positional authority, personal influence. Influence over authority. Creating alignment and culture, the teamwork concept part of it. And I'll talk in a minute, and you really think about this. The organization that you work for puts you in the role you're in to do two things: develop solutions and solve problems. That's it. If you want a goal of a leader, that's what they do. Develop solutions and solve problems. And we'll talk about what they don't do in a minute. But if you focus on doing those two things, you'll probably be pretty successful. And then ownership and responsibility. And I want you to look at that word responsibility. Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Chapter 1 of that book talks about being proactive, and we talk about that a lot. And I think we should be proactive. But it's kind of neat if you look at that word and kind of change the spelling of it a little bit. It's our ability to respond. And as you think about leadership, as you think about the things we're talking about, I really like his circle of concern, circle of influence, and we've added to it a circle of control. But this is starting with yourself and then your team, your circle of influence, where you need to spend your time and energy. I feel like a lot of times we spend too much time and energy in our circle of concern, being that the organization we work for, when we drive all the other drivers on the road, our personal responsibility for our safety and for our team. And so that's a key concept to think about, is influence over authority we mentioned, and then make sure we're spending most of our time in our circle of control. Remember, the only person you can control and change is yourself. And that's difficult to do sometimes. And then we can influence our team. And The best way to shrink your circle of concern, by the way, as Covey says, grow your circle of influence. So gain influence. And that's just such a key part of it. And then if you wanted a brief definition of leadership, in my mind, that's two things. Gain influence, and then the performance of your team. Critical point here, performance, the definition of human performance, P equals B plus R. Performance equals behavior plus results. You can't focus on results alone. And when we do that, we make a lot of, with very good intentions, bad decisions, and send a lot of, back to that texting and driving example, think about this one. Your kid comes home from school today and they bring you a report card. It says straight A's. What do you immediately tell your kid? Great job. Depending on how old they are, you buy them ice cream. Older they get, you give them an Xbox gift card, whatever it is. But great job, you made straight A's. That's the result. What if the behavior is they're cheating? What did you just tell your kid? I want you to cheat and I want you to cheat more, and all I care about is whether you get A's or not. We have to, before you give anybody feedback or consequences, be it good or bad, you have to understand the behavior driving the results. And results are important. Please hear me say that. Quality, productivity, efficiency, safety, all those goals that you have, they're there for a reason, they're important. But we can't base our leadership on results alone. We have to think about the behavior driving the results, because bad behaviors can lead to good results, good behaviors can lead to good results. The opposite of all that is true. What's really important is, what can I change right now? I can change my behavior. I can't necessarily change the result. So influence and performance. Good definition of what leadership is. Back to lead to win. I want to spend most of our time talking about leadership, what it is, how to do it right, how to maximize it, proven principles, those sort of things. But let's take just a few minutes and think about what leadership is not. Just remember the first 5 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E. That stands for accuse, blame, complain, defend and deny, make excuses. The opposite of that is to develop solutions and solve problems. So when people come to you, or when situations arise, and this is something that I actually do from time to time, is literally take a sheet of paper and write A, B, C, D, E on the left column, and then write develop solutions and solve problems in the right column. And every time a challenging situation arises, just put a little tick mark on which one you're gravitating towards. And sometimes that can be a little bit humbling in terms of how we handle that. And it's easy to do. Think about it. You're sitting at a red light. Light turns green. Legally, compliance. That's why compliance can't be the goal of safety. I can go through the intersection. The green light gives me permission. Now, per the law, per all the standards, per the regulations, I can go through the intersection. So that red light turns green, I grow, here comes another driver, just to make this bad. So they're speeding 30 miles an hour over the speed limit. They're under the influence of both drugs and alcohol. They're on their phone, they're on 2 phones, one texting, one driving. Their performance, their behavior is horrible, right? They T-bone you. You get hurt. Now, bust your shoulder up or whatever, and you're out of work and you can't coach your kids' teams or whatever the things you like to do in some of your hobbies for the next 6 months. And what's really easy in this challenging situation is check that box over there on the left. Poor pitiful me. And blame the other driver. Now hear me say, from a legal, and if they're doing all that stuff, they very well may go to jail. Their insurance is going to handle all your claims and all that, and then legally they were responsible from a compliant perspective. The better question to ask is, what could I have done? Because now we're starting in our circle of concern, which is that other driver. If we start in our circle of control, what could I have done? Look left, look right, look left again before you go. And maybe you see that driver coming and you stop and you prevent the accident. We can't spend our time focusing on what everybody else needs to do. We need to spend our time thinking about, what can I do right now to develop solutions and solve problems? So leadership, not accuse, blame, complain, defend, deny, make excuses. That's not what people look for in you as a leader. That's not what you look for in your leaders. What they look for is to develop solutions and solve problems. This is really important. There's a quote in the book that says, the only time your leadership should be about you is if you're looking for somebody to blame. And it's a long way of saying, there's a certain way any of us like to lead. There's a certain way that we like to communicate. There's a certain way that we think work should be performed. In other words, there's things that are comfortable to me, and then there's things that are very convenient for me. That's not what leadership is about. It can't be about comfort and convenience. Those two words, by the way, in my mind, are the two biggest enemies of safety, comfort and convenience. So it can't just be on the easiest, most readily available solution and based on what I know, what I need, what I want. It has to be based on the team and the people you're dealing with. Actually, your leadership style, we could do a whole presentation on this, but just think about this for now. Your leadership should always be based on the person or the people that you're dealing with, the task being performed, and the environment that you're in. And if you intentionally and strategically choose your leadership style and strategy based on those three things, you'll probably be successful. Back to something I said earlier, you can't control or change other people. Too much time in leadership, we spend time trying to control or change other people. Grow your influence. Then you won't have to worry about trying to control and change other people. Not about compliance. This is really, really important to understand that in terms of safety, just because we're in compliance doesn't mean we're out of danger. And I call it, if you look at the hierarchy of controls, below and above the line protection. But it's really important to understand rules, procedures, and processes are there for a reason. And we should and have to follow them to protect ourselves. But compliant, I'm doing distribution work on the side of the road. I am perfectly 100% compliant if I have my cones and signs set up like the MUTCD says I should. And depending on what state I'm in and I'm following all those rules and regulations, 100% compliant. What I am not is protected. Those signs and cones can actually become hazards themselves. You want to go above the line, we start thinking about things like crash barriers or the crash trucks at the end of work zone, or better yet, we start thinking about words like elimination and reduction, and maybe we close the road or at least close one lane, reduce the speed limit, those kind of things. So it's not about settling for compliance, especially when we're talking about safety. We could spend a lot of time talking about that. And then back to the whole authority over influence. Leadership is not, at least at the start. Sometimes you have to force compliance. But it's not about instilling fear in others and this whole do this or else kind of leadership. And it's also in talking about fears, not about our own fears of, and therefore avoiding words like change, words like delegation, words like emotional intelligence, developing relationships. Again, if we're not comfortable with those things ourselves, there's still things that we need to take into account. And the loss of power ties into the delegation part of it. So again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about what leadership is not. Let's talk about what it is. Authority over influence, caring over liking, which we're getting ready to talk about in a minute, because when we think about who leaders are, characteristics of effective leaders, we came up with C5 leadership. And I'll stress, I mean, this is 5 words that start with C. At the end of the day, that's all it is. And therefore, C5 leadership. So I don't want you to think this is any kind of the complete, comprehensive, be-all, end-all, do this in terms of leadership, and that's it. What it is a strategy to grow your influence. And if you take each one of these words separately and especially put them all together, they really start to work. Competence, commitment, caring, courage, credibility. Look at the order. What's in the middle? How much you care. Everything you do has to revolve around how much you care. And look at the definition of caring. It's 2 parts: preventing harm, encouraging growth. And then at the bottom of that list is credibility. Not because it's the least important, but because that's the foundation. Building trust, giving trust, earning trust, maintaining trust, hugely important. Now let's differentiate 2 words here: caring and liking. And where you see a lot of people in leadership positions with fairly good intention, and honestly, back to a culture, I think sometimes we set people up for this. And by that I mean it is very common in construction and especially in utilities, folks get promoted. And so one day, back to this distribution crew I was talking about earlier, I'm a topped out lineman, and I've been a topped out line worker for the last 5 years. And I get promoted to a crew leader or four-person, whatever that's called at your organization. And literally the training I get is, here's a different color hard hat, the keys to your brand new pickup truck, and an iPad or a computer. Good luck. And that's kind of it. And the 3 or 4 people that were my peers yesterday now work for me. And it is real easy in that environment for me to still want to be popular and for people to like me. And I really want you to think about it in terms of leadership. The point I'm making here, I said earlier, influence has to trump authority. Caring has to trump liking. Because think about it. If my goal is for you to like me, and I see somebody on the team doing something that could get them hurt or negatively impact the team's performance, if my goal is for people to like me, it's easy enough for me to completely ignore that or kind of brush it under the rug because I still want you to like me. It's easy if somebody's in a job briefing, work planning discussion, and I have a question and I don't understand something and I'm worried about what everybody else is going to think about me, I probably don't say something. If there's something that happened on my job today that is a valuable lesson the whole organization could learn from, and my focus is on caring, liking over caring, and I'm concerned about what people think about me again, I'm probably not going to report it because we don't want to get anybody in trouble. But if I care, preventing harm, encouraging growth, in those same scenarios, it is impossible for me not to say something if I see a situation that could get somebody hurt. If I'm really concerned about the performance of the team, it is impossible for me not to say something, see something, do something. If I have a question and I'm confused about the job briefing and our work plan, and I really care, there's no way I can, what I'm saying, liking, if that's our goal, it tends to promote either inaction or the wrong actions. If we care, that gives us the courage in terms of C5 leadership to take action. We're going to see something. We're going to say something. We're going to do something because we care. And so in just a summary of this, if you think about all these words, think about something you like to do. Something I like to do is to play golf. Now, I want to say here, and I want to stress this, I play golf. I am not a golfer. Those are two completely different things, and I don't want to insult anybody that actually is a golfer. But I like to play golf. And so really think about this task called golf and leadership, okay? And if I wanted to get better at golf, what would I do? Who would I go to? How would I go about improving that? I would probably start with, for this task called golf, who's the most competent person that I know at this task? Who is the subject matter expert? And maybe, always remember this too, feedback is always going to be received better and be more effective when it is solicited than when it's unsolicited. There's another sign of creating culture, developing relationships. Are you forcing feedback on other people, or are they asking you to observe them perform a certain task and want to get better at it because they see you as a resource rather than a villain, so to speak? But so I call this is kind of a funny story, but I won't go into all the details, but let's just say there was a time in my life when I'm still not a very good golfer, but I was a very, very bad golfer. And a friend of mine who, +2 handicap, if you know anything about golf, literally the most competent person I know. I get done playing one day and he literally looks at me and he says, "David, you're too athletic and you play too much golf to be that bad. Meet me at the driving range tomorrow night." Now, I mean, courage to say that for sure, I guess. But back to this run up of creating culture, developing relationships. We had a relationship, comfortable talking to each other. A little bit of caring and a whole lot of commitment. Volunteered his time, I mean hours. Took me to the driving range. We worked on some things, comfort and convenience. Everything he told me, I hated. From how he was telling me to hold the club to what I hated every bit of it. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't what I wanted to do. But I listened, and guess what happened? Started getting better at golf. And really think what happened for this task called golf. Every time I play, number one, if I do it well, I automatically think of him. And I think of these 5 words on the screen. And if I'm struggling with something, who do I go to? And he has gained so much influence in this scenario because of a little bit of caring, a whole lot of commitment, competence on his part, little courage to say something. And decidedly, when you're that competent at something and somebody sees you helping them and it works, you gain a lot of credibility. It literally, I mean, I give him so much influence, you could call it authority at that point in time if you want. And it's not this situation we create a lot where somebody comes and watches me play golf and maybe I know them, maybe I don't, and they're forcing a lot of feedback on me. And in that environment, especially when it's stuff that I'm not comfortable with, I'm not going to listen. But if we develop culture, create the relationships, this stuff starts to work. So base your leadership on how much you care. We don't necessarily have to like each other. It's good if we do. But you have to care. Prevent harm, encourage growth. And if you base that, the other example I like to use of this C5 leadership is the first time somebody becomes a parent. Because think how growing any one of these words will grow the other four, and it will also grow the amount of influence you have. So when you first become a parent, zero competence. This task called parenting, you have no clue. You've never done it before, which also means you have zero credibility. And if you're like me and most people that I talk to, you are absolutely scared to death. Zero courage. We could debate about commitment, but for most of us, what we have is a lot of caring. And because we care so much, what magically happens to those other four words in terms of competence, in terms of courage, in terms of our credibility? And it starts with and centers around how much we care. Are you ever going to care about the people you work with as much as you do your family? Probably not. Should you care about them a lot? Yes. Every member of your team, because if we separate the liking part of it, it's very easy to care about people enough to want to prevent harm and encourage growth. So that is a great starting point and a great principle. So influence over authority, caring over liking. C5 leadership, grow. Influence. What leaders do, and there's a whole lot of things that leaders do. And this is a list of leadership skills you have to be adaptability. You have to be adaptable in terms of the leadership style and strategy that you're using based on people, task, and environment, like we talked about. You have to make rational and informed decisions. I don't really have time to elaborate on this, but I hope we can agree right now, especially in terms of safety, we cannot rely on ourselves and others to make good or right decisions. Our definitions of good and right change. We have to make informed and rational decisions. If you don't understand what I'm saying, go back to the cell phone example. It is a good and right decision not to text and drive. The decisions we make, and we can't just base the logic on everybody's always going to make a good and right decision. If you don't believe me, go get on the road right now and look what all the other drivers are doing. If we're counting on people and making assumptions that other people are always going to make good and right decisions, they're not. It's just the reality of it. So part of leadership is gaining influence, ourselves and others, encouraging them to make rational, informed, intentional, and effective decisions, especially around how we're going to protect ourselves from hazards. Communicate for mutual understanding. Communication may be the critical skill in terms of leadership, and I'm actually going to come back to that one. Some others, leadership is a skill. Anything that's a skill can be learned, practiced, and improved. Developing relationships is in and of itself a skill. And again, the goal of this relationship is mutual respect, mutual trust, mutual appreciation for each person and the task that they perform. I see too many situations where we appreciate all the people on our team, but some of the tasks they do are viewed as kind of the unimportant, meaningless tasks that just somebody has to do. And if I perceive that everybody thinks the job that I do is meaningless and doesn't add value, I probably also feel like I don't add a lot of value to the team. So mutual trust, respect, and appreciation for all the people on the team and the tasks that are being performed. Really important. Coaching and feedback. Go back to those 5 C words. Competence, commitment, caring, courage, credibility. What better way can you think of to demonstrate that than to be able to watch somebody perform a task and give them feedback on what they're doing right that needs to be repeated? Never discount the fact. A lot of times when people are doing things right, they're working out of habit and they really don't know why. Positive feedback is important for a lot of reasons. Number one, it should be your primary strategy because it works. HP Principle 4, people achieve high levels of performance because of support, reinforcement, and encouragement they receive from leaders, peers, and subordinates. So don't ever discount the power of positive reinforcement. But also, in terms of C5 leadership, coaching, and feedback, how can I give both a combination of positive feedback, constructive criticism, whatever you want to call it, that helps people do a job or a task safer, more productively, more efficiently? Because if you can watch me do something and you can make me better at it and you can make me feel safer and more protected, now we're back into that whole solicited feedback. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to want your opinion. If you are focused on compliance and what I'm doing wrong all the time, I'm not going to want to see you and I'm not going to want to listen to you. Now Andy Stanley said it really well. Leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people with nothing to say. Coaching and feedback is maybe one of the most critical skills. And I think if you approach it, especially the word caring, from a C5 leadership perspective, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care, right? You've probably heard that before. And that's really important in terms of coaching and feedback. To think about how we're approaching it, how we're delivering it, what our motivations are. That's a skill. Practice that skill. The number one way to practice giving feedback, by the way, practice receiving it well. Because when we get feedback, you remember those ABCDE words? We're really good at accusing, blaming, complaining, defending, denying, making excuses, and a whole lot of other things that we do. We're not really good at thinking about, okay, maybe there's something I could do different here. So that's something to think about. And then leading change, right? I have no problem with this, but a lot of companies and a lot of people talk about change management. Management is about things. It's about budgets and timelines and work plans, which are important. There's nothing wrong with that. Leadership is about people. It's about influence. And so I really like the term leading change instead of managing change, but that's kind of beside the point. It is a skill though. And it is something, as we mentioned earlier, that we tend to avoid or resist. And if we as a leader, your attitude is contagious, your team is a reflection of you. Think about that next time you see a bad attitude or something you don't like about your team. That can be a very challenging statement sometimes. But if we always resist change, guess what our team's going to do? Whereas if we try to make informed, rational, intentional, and effective decisions, like we were talking about earlier, when there's a change, that encourages our team to do the same thing. So I think a good way for all the stuff that we've talked about, and we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I only just want you to remember a few things. And I think a good way to talk, one of those skills we mentioned, kind of a great way I think of wrapping this up, is communication. And this could be a very long discussion. I'm not going to make it a very long discussion about communication skills. But here's this communication process, I guess you'd call it, okay? It includes a person sending a message, the sender. It has a receiver or a group of people that are receivers. It has a message and it has feedback. Somewhere between all that is the media, how we choose to communicate. Now, just as an example of how good we are at communication, when's the last time you sent somebody a text or an email because you had to communicate with somebody, but you didn't actually want to talk to them? And that's an example of maybe lack of courage or some other things that we've talked about. But the media selection's important. Obstacles, like it's a huge obstacle if we speak different languages. It's a huge obstacle if we write our safety manuals and processes at a 6th grade education level and our workforce has a 3rd grade education level on average or whatever. It's a huge obstacle on most of your job sites that the stuff you work around and with is pretty loud. And there's a whole lot of distractions from the public and other things that go on. Communication's hard, it really is. And then the way we filter communication. And think how we filter communication, credibility, C5 leadership at the bottom. There are people that when they talk to you or communicate with you, you think, hey, this person's so credible, even if I don't necessarily agree with the message, they're probably right because I trust them. And there are people that are communicating with you who literally, if they told you I'm standing in South Carolina right now, you wouldn't believe them just because they're talking. You don't trust them, right? So, and then so it's our experience with both the sender and the message. If you want to become a better communicator, the number one thing, and I want you to really think about this in terms of everything that we've talked about. I argue that we're better communicators when we don't speak the same language, which sounds absolutely ridiculous to say, so I'll say it again. We're better communicators when we don't speak the same language. So I'm speaking English, and even in English, there's my North Carolina-ish version of English that some people don't understand. But so I'm speaking English and you're speaking, it doesn't matter, whatever other language. And we don't understand each other. We're actually really good at communication in that. Think about what happens. If we're both speaking English, the number one obstacle, George Bernard Shaw said this, the greatest illusion to communication is the illusion it has taken place. But if we both speak English, the number one assumption I make is just because I said it means you heard it. And just because you heard it means you understand it like I do. and we make a lot of assumptions. What's really cool if you think about this, if you're not speaking English, if you are speaking English, my focus is almost entirely on myself and my message. Say that again. When we're both speaking English and I'm making assumptions, I'm focused on myself and what I want to say. If I know that you don't speak English, my focus shifts almost entirely to the person or the group that I'm talking to and getting feedback from them. And my goal shifts entirely from saying whatever it is that I want to say to gauging whether or not we have mutual understanding. There's a big difference between agreement and understanding. The difference between communication and effective communication is mutual understanding. So I'll mention again, influence over authority, caring over liking, but it really is a great communication and a great leadership lesson just to think about what you see on the screen right now and think about shift your focus from yourself and your message to other people and feedback from them. Do that, and number one, you'll improve your communication skills, but you'll also become a much more effective leader. So just a couple of key points is understanding what leadership is, how to balance. I don't want to vilify authority, right? How to balance your influence and your authority. Influence should trump authority, but there are times when we should and can and need to, if it's strategic and intentional, use our authority, right? The cool thing is the more influence you gain, the less you have to rely on your authority. Like I mentioned in the golf example, it gets to the point where if you gain so much influence with a person or a group, it basically becomes authority and you can't even tell the difference. C5 leadership. I really do love that list. And I'll stress again, it's not complete and comprehensive. But if you want to think about how can I grow my influence, become more competent, both as a leader and for the technical tasks that your team does. Find ways to demonstrate how much committed, your level of commitment you are about the team and each individual achieving its goals, which is really important when we talk about culture and alignment. If we don't have the same goals, it's very difficult for a team to achieve goals. Caring, prevent harm, and encourage growth. Not going home every day. Part of the goal of safety is, yes, everybody goes home safely every day. People say that all the time. I say this, make it your goal for people to go home better. Now we're talking about actually training and developing people, both in terms of technical tasks and soft skills. And that's where we really get into, I want to empower people for the task that's involved. So centers around caring, the foundation of credibility, and then what leaders do, all those leadership skills really boils down to performance, not just results, but what kind of performance can the team achieve? Generate success in both the individual and the team. It's critical that as you think about this, you're focused on the individuals and the team, not your circle of concern, not the whole entire organization, but for this group, most of you probably in this industry, it's 4 or 5 person crews. For that 4 or 5 person crews, if you're in the field, what can we do in terms of influence and authority? And really go, some of these gauges we talked about. How often are you relying on authority over influence? How comfortable are people talking to each other? Does the same person lead the job briefing every day? Find opportunities to grow your influence, make your team better, because as we really truly think about all the hurdles, and there's a lot of them with leadership, create culture, develop relationships, really think in track and field, you get that run up really good, you almost don't even jump over the hurdle. You just keep running right over it. And it seems a whole lot smaller, but if you just stand there and you hadn't put the time and the effort into the culture, that hurdle sometimes seems so high and really is, you can't get over it. So you cannot invest enough in terms of creating culture and developing relationships. And I want to just mention a couple of things in terms of if you want to learn more, so to speak. So at Incident Prevention, number one, these ECOS, I really cannot thank Brent and Beer Meters enough for what they're doing and growing the electric culture of safety. I can be involved in it. If you courage, call Brent, offer to give a presentation, but find ways to be involved in that. Very active in some of the LinkedIn and other platforms. Join some of those groups. But at Incident Prevention, Utility Business Media, our group, we publish a couple of magazines. One of them's Incident Prevention. It's free. Incident-prevention.com. There's a QR code on your screen. Check that out. I always say it's free, at least go check it out. If you like it, read it again. If you don't. Same thing, once a month, we have a forum. That's Brent's goal with electric culture of safety, as we were talking about this earlier. Nobody wants to compete in terms of safety. If we work for different companies and we kind of deliver the same product, there's things we're going to compete about. But I really do like in this industry, nobody wants to, we all do want to work together, and we want to prevent harm and encourage growth. And that's good. And one of the things we do along those lines is once a month we hold a forum, just where anybody can log in if you're in the utility industry. And we provide a panel of subject matter experts, but the easy way to explain that is if you've got a question, if they can't answer it then, some of your peers that are there may. Excellent opportunity to network, but if we don't have the answer, we'll find the answer for you. And it really is a way to develop solutions and solve problems for the industry that we can all do together. So I encourage you to check that out. And then if you enjoyed this presentation, the books that Brent mentioned, you can check those out on Amazon as well. And I really do, going back to that communication model, just think, if nothing else, about what can I do to demonstrate competence, commitment, caring, courage, credibility, focusing a whole lot more on my team than myself, and focus a whole lot more on feedback from others than the message that we want to send. Influence over authority, caring over liking. Nail the run up, you'll soar over the hurdles. I thank you so much for your time and attention, and Brent, thank you again for the opportunity to talk today.